Graham Hicks is a Year 6 teacher at Eastfield Primary School in Middlesex. He has developed a series of lessons based around the life of a fictional character in World War II. By interweaving historical events and sources with a fictional story, Graham aims to transport his pupils back in time to help them grapple with the complexities of the past and to develop their creative writing. So how effective is this approach? Today, Graham will review his lesson with ex-LEA inspector and history consultant Bernie Ashmore. They will discuss the benefits and limitations of this approach and how other teachers can adapt this technique into their own classrooms.
I thought it was really interesting how powerful the pupils found the story. In fact, one of them said that they were able in writing to actually replay the story video in their heads while they were writing.
It is a good idea, that, because when I see, I'm talking here now, to me, it's like a video in my head. All I can see is what I'm about to talk about. So it's quite amazing now. I can actually see the children's faces because you just don't notice them.
Well, that's the power of the story, because they're so intense. I mean, it was like they'd been transformed right into the place where you were, into the story. Yeah. And I think, their whole behaviour, the way they were focused, it was like it wasn't in a normal lesson anymore.
You've come to liberate us. We welcome the German army.
You've given quite a sympathetic interpretation to the aspect of how you made the German army actually look quite positive. Were you worried at all about the bias that might be inherent in that?
Yes, I think I have to be very careful, because obviously history tells us that their occupation of the Ukraine was a very, very unpleasant time for the inhabitants of that country. And obviously there's a lot of political aspects that I would have to look at.
But how do you ensure that the pupils here, how are you confident are you that they've got an overall view of what the German army was like?
Well, what I'm trying to do, I'm going to use the story. I think it's a lot to do with the character of Wolfgang as well, because throughout his life his opinions will change as things change. So at the moment he may well have, as you say, a more sympathetic attitude to the German army. After a time he was going to see events that perhaps will change his sympathy, will change his feeling, will change his outlook. And in a way you're just using this person to show how opinions can change.
I think you're right, because so often what World War II is for lots of pupils in our primary schools, it's white children get evacuated from London, have a nice time and come back to London. Although I think your great subject knowledge allowed you, do you think that might be a problem for other teachers without the in-depth subject knowledge?
I think that's where you've got to think, if you're going to do a lesson like this, you've got to do a subject that you're confident with. I mean, if I had to do a legionnaire in the Roman army, now I would find that a lot more difficult, because I haven't got the background reading.
But you could maybe rely on more prompts in that case, and actually do less of the teacher in role, but you can still do a small
that's right,
amount.
and I would obviously tackle it slightly differently. Here because I do understand this period, I've got a broader canvas to sort of paint on, and you can...
I think that is an important point, because one of the criticisms of primary history is the lack of subject knowledge of teachers, particularly. But it's realising you actually don't need as much as you, but if you've got the structure of the lesson right, you can still interweave a certain amount of story in it. I think all teachers can take some elements from this approach. The power of teacher in role, which could just be a 5-minute element rather than a half-hour or 40-minute element in the lesson, but it can still be powerful. I've seen a teacher just walk out the room and say, when I come back, I'm going to be Florence Nightingale. And they'd walk in and the pupils will respond directly to them just for a short time. And it's that power of the pupils responding to the historic character.
Here it came, addressed to me.
Interesting the way you used objects and artefacts in the story. So often they're just separate from the story, but you managed to interweave them. Why did you actually bring in the food at this point?
Well, I think food is really important. All children know about food. And one of the things, if you're trying to talk about the army, for example, food is really monotonous. But also, you can get two things in here. One, the link with home. So we can think about the importance of the idea that he is a long way from home. And also, I think it gave them a chance to actually come into the story, because quite often when I've done this before, although I'm talking to them as this character, there's still a barrier, but suddenly now they've made contact with the past.
Well, that was one of my worries about your approach here, because you actually spend most of the time, you are controlling it, you are the performer, and they seem to be very passive. And another teacher might be quite critical of that, but it seems to me that they are engaged. You can just see the way, the intensity, they're mentally engaged with you, even though they might not be active. But this was the first opportunity they had to actually engage in the story.
Last night I went with your mother and father to the cinema and we saw the film of The Advance. I looked hard for you, but I couldn't see you.
Most teachers, when they use artefacts, make it the centre of the lesson. Now, you've used artefacts in a very different way here.
Well, I think it gives you a lot more life. You're building up a sort of kaleidoscope of images for children, and they'll latch onto some.
And I think the pupils said that in their writing. That image comes up, and on the back of that image, they've got all the words, the actions that you've taken throughout the lesson. And often it can be that picture for a lot of our pupils. It is the hook that enables them to access the rest of that.
Yeah, I agree.
Do you think there's an issue with the way you interweave some original source material, like the OHP with the picture of the village, and the letters, which are artefacts that you made yourself? And how would you help pupils distinguish between them?
Because they're used to me modelling things in literacy in particular, I think they can say, oh, Mr Hicks has written this.
Yeah. And that worked well with the letter, because when they came to the writing, they had that modelled. And how about helping them understand the difference between that as a made-up one and original source materials?
We've done a lot of work that has been fictitious, so the children know about fiction, they know about non-fiction. And quite often I will run a lesson in conjunction with this, which doesn't involve Wolfgang, it involves almost like Wolfgang's surroundings.
Right. The context in which Wolfgang
is, the world in which
he's going to move.
I have done a lesson and the children did a little project on the actual German army. They have also, we looked at the famine in the Ukraine, for example, and they have a sort of timeline in their heads more than anything of when these sort of things happened.
See, that could alleviate some teachers' fears for how they separate out the actual historical data from the interpretations you put.
You know, you'd have a purely history lesson and then use this to make that period come alive, I think.
Because you've got those objects, you've got the pictures of those details, and then you've got the story, both orally and the backup of the written letters as well. So you're actually engaging learners in a whole variety of ways.
Yeah.
What Graham has is a balance to what most teachers do. I think most teachers focus on the story and get children to recreate the story with just the factual information accurately stored. I think what Graham's work and his pupils do is go beyond that into far more complex and richer historical interpretation.
I think it was the Germans who smashed that town or someone else.
It could be either. It could be the Russian army pulling back.
I think one of the things you've done well here is provoking historic questions. One of the key things of inquiry is actually trying to provoke appropriate historic questions, and just listening to their questions really shows that you've done that well.
So his question has also enabled me to give some historical background. So you're giving the children some information.
Could have been the German army searching for what you call partisans. Yes, Katerina.
Did you get bored of waiting for a fight in the war?
It is interesting. Most kids and most of us think of war as an exciting thing. How do you think they came to that sort of question?
Well, I think in some ways, the way the story's gone so far, I've deliberately kept Wolfgang out of any direct war, using quotes like 23 and a half hours of boredom and half an hour of sheer terror. It's nothing glamorous, war. It is boring, it is horrible, which children I don't think often have the opportunity to fully appreciate without someone to talk it through with.
Right, so would you say that they wouldn't ask you, if you were acting as a teacher in role of teacher, right, instead of as the role of Wolfgang, you don't think you'd get the same quality of question?
No, you'd be asking more in the third person. I don't think a child would ask me, Mr Hicks, how do you think such and such would felt?
Yeah.
But they would say, how do you feel if, you're that person?
Yes, no, I can see that, because the pupils, in terms of answering how what you did helped them write, were saying about the fact that it was first person, it was immediate and direct. So that clearly engages them in a way that talking about Wolfgang wouldn't work.
How did you feel when all the Ukrainians were greeting you instead of the French that just stared at you?
Quite surprised. I hoped it would always be like that.
Different types of questions also helps me assess where the children actually are. Now that to me shows a bigger understanding of the period, and this child is now beginning to link together some chronology. She knew the French were invaded first, and there was a different type of invasion. So I can actually say that this child has now grasped.
You're assessing their historic understanding through the questions they ask rather than the answers they give.
That's right. So even through answers and questions are just as important in dealing with that.
How do you think we could advise teachers to be able to handle questions like this if they've got less subject knowledge, less detailed subject knowledge to draw on?
I suppose you could leave your answers more open-ended to build on. Perhaps you could say, well, that is a good point. Could we now explore that? Could you then use their question to lead you into the next part of your historical study. So there's no harm in actually turning around and saying,
let's go and
explore that, because and then you've got more of a pupil-led activity going on, and the history is going the way the children want it to go.
Which is what historic inquiry should be. You're actually following children's own questions and supporting them in following the line of inquiry.
I don't see it being the be-all and end-all of being able to answer every single question. I don't physically you couldn't do it.
And I think that key thing, that actually for a lot of historic questions, we don't have all the answers.
No, we don't. We just have an interpretation.
I think the best thing about this lesson is the creative thinking, where pupils actually draw on all the detailed historic knowledge that Graham's put into the lesson, but they interpret it in their own way. The thinking skills, they're selecting from that data, they're making some priorities about which is the most important, and they're pulling it together. It's what historians do when they're writing real history, and often pupils in history lessons don't do real history. In terms of the history, I mean, why have you selected writing rather than doing a role play or a drama?
I suppose really I was under pressure to improve boys' writing 18 months ago. Nationally we seem to be, and I've got to find a way of doing it. I'll use my historical knowledge first of all. Concentrating here on the content. I'm not interested to such an extent. I know this is a difficult thing to say about capital letters, full stops. I want them to write history. What I want them to be able to do here is use what they've learnt in literacy to give them the ability to communicate their history.
Your pupils clearly wanted to write. The way they got down to their writing, they clearly wanted to write and had a lot to write. And I think you've modelled the vocabulary they use. And what I found is that in their writing, they've used a lot of the vocabulary they may not have written before, but they've heard it. And as they said in their replaying their video, as we said earlier, is they actually hear your words and then they can draw from that oral thesaurus, almost that they've got in their head, and put that on the writing, even if they still at that point don't know how to spell it.
That's right, and they're not getting it just from text. And if you can't access text very well, surely it's better sometimes to hear it spoken, to see a picture.
In terms of the literacy, the people who've got literacy in their minds, what would you see as the advantages of spending this amount of time where you linked history and literacy together?
I've just tried another attempt just to improve the quality of writing and the children's desire to write without the constraints of thinking, what targets have I got to achieve? Am I doing towards the objective? Let's let children write for once, but let's also give them something that they can feel emotional about.
I think this delivers on certain literacy objectives. What about the literacy objectives that aren't being delivered through your approach?
I don't think you can cover everything in every subject. I would use this, and I will stand by it, because the quality of writing I get. And, all right, I don't achieve every literacy objective, but can you tell me something that does? Which gets the children actively engaged and enjoy writing it.
My mind is losing all images of you since we have left each other. I'm healthy. Thank you for the food parcel.
I just want them to leave the lesson feeling, I learnt something there, I got involved in something, and I asked questions and I got some answers. And next week I'll find out some more and think, yeah, I look forward to it next week.
I think this approach overall does involve some risk-taking for many teachers. It is stepping outside the bounds of what you might think is history, but it is good quality history. It engages the pupils, it does deliver on historic knowledge, and it will give them a sound basis for developing history further on in their secondary education.